Okay, so quick warning before today's video. Don't eat while watching this. Just don't. Trust me, it's just not worth it. If you are one of the 5 people who actually watch my videos, I'm sure you also have an interest in the world of lost media. I have spent hours on this topic on various cases, something as innocent as that fake SpongeBob documentary, to something as infamous as Lost Superman, let's say. But today, I want to talk about a lost media case that makes me sick to my stomach. Literally. Within a small and unassuming portion of Fort Worth, Texas, there lies a Dollar General. Now, if you're from the southern United States like me, that probably won't come as a shock. Those things are literally everywhere. However, to understand the importance of this building, we need to turn the clock back to July of 1999, when Dollar General went by a different name, Mexia Supermarket.
Hi, Editor Snake Tie here. So I'm going to be popping in occasionally to give some corrections and or updates. So apparently it's not pronounced Mexia, it's pronounced Mexia. I'm so glad I figured that out as I started editing.
For the majority of its life, Mexia was exactly as advertised. It was a small, unassuming supermarket ran by 2 people from Laos. However, eventually, the money would run out and the store would have to close. Sad for the owners, but it's nothing new. These things happen all the time. But as soon as the 2 owners locked the doors for the last time, something disgusting would begin to brew inside. It would result in what is, in my opinion, the grossest lost media case ever. This is the story of the Mexia Supermarket incident.
The smell was extremely bad outside, and we really don't have an accurate report about what it was inside because we always put people in protective gear before we went in. The report was it was so bad that you could not see the hand at the end of your arm. The flies were so thick.
Food shops become tombs for culinary corpses. Fruit has shriveled up. Non-packaged meat has decomposed. Only bones remain. In the time of humans, this horrifying scene had already played out in one American city.
Quick heads up before we start. This video is going to be more shorter form. I'm not going to go into as much detail. I'm doing this mostly just because I want to upload more than twice a year. So hopefully it works out and I get more quality content pumped out more consistently. Our story begins in late 1997. These 2 individuals from Laos would come to Fort Worth, Texas, and they would begin an investment company known as Advanced Investment Corp. The first project would be acquiring a supermarket called Denals, which had recently closed. Now, the building that housed Denals actually had a dark history of its own. It was actually the scene of a murder. On the 29th of May, 1994, 18-year-old Eduardo Lopez was performing his typical duties as manager of Denals when a gunman entered the store and demanded to see a safe. Now, Eduardo would initially comply with the robber's demands, but for one reason or another, the plans would fall through and Eduardo would lose his life after being shot in the head. The case is still cold to this day and police still do not have a suspect. Obviously, an event as horrific as that, the Denals store would gain very bad vibes and it would close soon after. This is where AIC would come in around 97. They would purchase Denals and they would turn it into Mexia Supermarket. And while we don't know an exact date of opening, due to public tax records, we can figure it was probably around late 1998. Also, fun little tidbit, I have to tell you guys this. The lawyer for AIC, his name was Stephen Strange. That has nothing to do with anything, I just wasn't not going to tell you guys that. Mexia would remain open for a little under a year. Was it a success? No, it was not a success. For one reason or another, the owners just could not generate profit for the store. Everything fell through and they eventually closed their doors around July or August of 1999, eventually filing for bankruptcy on the 28th of September the same year. Now, usually when a supermarket is closed or it goes bankrupt, the food that is still in there is usually donated to a food drive or a homeless shelter. However, at Mexia, the story would be very different. So, the store is closed, and the owners do not contact the health department, they do not contact the homeless shelter, they do not contact the food drive, they simply lock the doors and go back to Laos. Thankfully, the building still has power for the time being. That would be until late October, around October the 18th, give or take, when the power would be shut off and the food would essentially be left out bare. In the days following the building going dark, the people who worked and lived around Mexia would begin to complain of an awful smell. In fact, one person who rode past the store every day would complain of getting headaches every single time they drove past it. Health and city officials began to pinpoint the source of the smell to Mexia. However, finding the source was about to be the least of their problems. City officials would initially try to contact the owners of the place, but remember, they're probably 9,000 miles away in Laos by now. So instead, they would contact the bank who originally gave the loan to the owners to open the supermarket up. The bank would in turn contact a company called A Plus Budget Movers, essentially a cleanup crew to help clean up the place. Problem solved, right? No. As soon as the crew got there, they essentially said something along the lines of, "Hell no, we're not doing this. Have you seen how bad it is in there?" As it turns out, Fort Worth's health officials did have an idea of how bad it was in there. When the Environmental Management Department first arrived on scene, they saw a parking lot full of dead rats and roaches, and on the windows, they saw dozens and dozens of flies. So they labeled the building a health hazard, they pumped the building full of pesticides, they dressed workers head to toe in hazmat, and on November 16th, they finally went in. This is what they saw. As I mentioned earlier, the place was essentially awash in rats and roaches and flies. There were so many rats within the store that their excrement essentially covered most of the floor. And because there was so much bacteria in this building, a lot of the rats were straight up dead. The fruits and vegetables had begun to rot, and inside a lot of them were maggots. All the meat in the store went bad, and they were essentially either covered in maggots or they rotted away entirely. The cartons of milk that lined the shelves were beginning to fill up with lactic acid, so a lot of them swelled up and some even exploded. Going back to the flies real quick, when a worker was walking down an aisle, he would put his hand out in front of his face, and he couldn't even see his hand when he stretched it out because the air was just so thick with flies. Oh, by the way, this is just a side tangent. I hate flies. I hate them so much. They're my least favorite insect in the world. I cannot eat if there's a fly in the house. I cannot. But for me, I think the grossest part was what happened to the packaged meats, the deli meats, so to speak. They began to break down into what they called a blackish gray goo. The only products that survived were canned goods and jars of honey. However, even they could not be used because so much bacteria was in the stores that they began to get on the lids and stuff, so they had to be chunked too. And even decontamination workers would after they came out of the store, they would have to go through a whole decontamination process. They just come out of a nuclear wasteland. The main cleanup would go on for around a week. However, the full cleanup would go on for months. Apart from a couple break-ins, there really wouldn't be any more incidents inside of Mexia, and the cleanup would end on November 30th. However, even to this day, there are people who still claim they can still smell a foul smell within the walls of the now Dollar General.
Apparently this location recently closed. The Dollar General there just closed very recently. I can't confirm it, but some images I've seen on the Discord dedicated to finding this stuff, apparently it's closed.
If you go into reviews of the place, you'll find people mentioning the smell, although take these with a grain of salt because a lot of these people are just trolling. Also, gotta mention, the boy Nexpo, he did a on-location shoot there for a video he was doing, and he claimed he smelled nothing. Gotta love my boy Nexpo. So that's the story of the incident itself, and it's fascinating. I could do a whole video just on the incident alone. But in recent times, the story has taken a new life here on the internet, starting in 2010 when it got featured on a certain TV show.
See what happened when this Texas supermarket was abandoned with all the food still inside.
So, Life Without People is like this what-if show that aired for 2 seasons around 2010. It aired on History Channel, aka the channel that teaches anything but actual history. The show is pretty much about what would happen, certain scenarios if all humans on Earth suddenly disappeared all at once. However, our focus is going to be on the Season 2, Episode 4, The Last Supper. It's pretty much what would happen to the world's food stocks once humanity disappeared. And featured in this episode was a segment about a certain supermarket. The Mexia segment starts around 17 minutes in, assuming the YouTube upload I used is accurate. Essentially just gives a brief explanation about what happened at Mexia, what happened to the food, and what could happen to other places like Mexia if this happened all over the world. It's not a really in-depth explanation, but I want you to focus on the footage that they've been using throughout this segment. It's the real footage of the Mexia cleanup. I've been using it in this video too, and it's going to be the main focal point for the second half of this video. The footage was filmed by Fort Worth officials around 1999, presumably around the start of the cleanup. The History Channel documentary only uses about 77 seconds of this footage, and as of now, that is all the footage that is available to the public. After the episode aired, many people said, hey, I want to take a look at the rest of the footage. However, we can't, because it's lost media. Now, from what it seems, this isn't actually the first time that Mexia footage appeared on television screens. KXAS was an NBC news station around the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I want to say it's still up to this day. And on November 16th, 1999, they would air 2 stories about Mexia, presumably using some footage. So, with that being said, do we have any leads on the footage right now? The answer is, unfortunately, probably not. I am far from the first person to go on a hunt for this stuff. There have been many who have came before me, and in particular, a Lost Media Wiki user known as Benjamin McHale. Benjamin would start his own search for the footage and would contact the most direct source possible, the supervisor of Fort Worth's health department, a man named Anthony Williams. Now, right away, Anthony would give us a pretty major clue. He would tell us the name of the individual who shot the original footage. His name was Jimmy McClurg, and maybe he has the original tape. Or maybe not, because tragically, Jimmy would pass away a year before Benjamin's search started. He did have a widow, but I would imagine it would be pretty disrespectful to just go up to his widow and say, hey, your husband, he filmed a store covered in rat poo. Can we see it? After it became clear that a different path needed to be taken, Benjamin would go back to Anthony and he would conduct a search of the Fort Worth digital archives, and he found nothing. Now, this may sound surprising that an entity like this would lose a tape like this, but you have to remember how many changes a department can go through over 25 years. In fact, that's the main cited reason as to why we can't find the original tape. Benjamin would next try the North Texas University Digital Archives, and this time he wouldn't come completely empty-handed. He wouldn't find the original video, but he would find a logbook which documented the details of it. And it gave us its recording date, November 16th, 1999. And while this is a very cool factoid about the video, it still doesn't answer our question whether or not it still exists or not. However, what I can tell you is that North Texas Archives have gone on record to say that they have never digitized the tape. Unfortunately, it seems the original tape is lost for good. There's a chance that someone out here still might have a physical copy of it, but after 26 years, it's safe to assume that it's degraded quite a bit. However, we're not completely out of options. So there's this website called Soul Strut, which seems to be a site for record collectors, which as you can tell I'd fit right in. It could have gone as something else years ago, but when I plugged it into the Internet Archive, it only went back to September of 2024, so in the words of Obi-Wan, perhaps the archives are incomplete. However, the forums that it has always held remain. In possibly June of 2011, an unknown user posted the question, do you still ever have nightmares of the ghetto? A user who went by the hookup would give a lengthy response to the question where he would share his memories about a particularly dirty supermarket, saying, quote, I did have dreams about this one neighborhood in Fort Worth that was due to a news story at the time. A supermarket in this one low-income area of the town that just closed one day. The doors locked, the owners left the country and went back to Laos. The fish was still in the coolers, the meat counter was still filled with meat, the produce still out. The electricity was shut off. It stood like that for a couple months. The images on the news is what gave me bad dreams. Windows blacked out by millions of roaches, rats in swarms. Also, what fricked me up was footage of people breaking in and stealing food, even after all this time. Imagine walking to a place like that for some canned goods. The smell had to be apocalyptic. 2-month-old fish, 2-month-old carrots, pork, thousands upon thousands of rat droppings. I was obsessed with the story, hence why I dreamed about it, being in there. Finally, the city went in, and they went in there with hazmat suits with fire hoses and tons of chemicals. They didn't burn it down because they said it would flood the neighborhood with thousands of fleeing rats, so they tinted it up and fumigated the freak out of it. I think. Still freaks me out. Now, as you can tell by Hookup's story, that's a terrible username, he mentioned that there were several stories aired on TV with footage. So the question is now, where are those news reports? So remember that station I mentioned earlier, KXAS? They aired several reports based on it. The logbook we mentioned earlier proved that. Now, this station has a bunch of their old news stories in the North Texas archives. Slight problem. There are thousands and thousands of news reports in their section of the archives alone. What idiot with way too much free time would look through all that? I started my search by searching up Mexia, and I found the original logbook, which confirmed that the stories did in fact air. I did not find the stories, however. Up next, I decided to email several news stations directly. I emailed KXAS and Telemundo Dallas, a Spanish-speaking station. Now, to be fully transparent, I don't speak Spanish, but thankfully I have friends who do. Shout out Rashim. Unfortunately, I was left empty-handed. They both responded to me after a few days. With KXAS, they only redirected me to the archives, and with the Telemundo station, they said their archives only go back to 2002. I searched high and low for any news broadcast related to Mexia, and I found nothing. At least regarding the cleanup, but we'll get back to that later. So I figured, why not try to contact the people involved with the Life After People show? And that's exactly what I did. I contacted Kyle Laskin and Lisa Cici, who were both involved with the making of the show, and guess what? They both got back to me. I'm not going to show their full email, just for privacy's sake, but I will summarize. Kyle pretty much said that he wasn't given the original footage, only the 77 seconds worth, and Lisa did conduct a search, but she was left empty-handed, which is a shame, but still pretty cool of them to respond to me pretty quickly. Unfortunately, it seems I didn't unearth anything new with the cleanup, but what I did find was pretty interesting. I looked up the name of the previous store that once held in the location called Denals, and I found some B-roll of a shoot a news team did after the robbery, which we talked about in the beginning. I don't think any other creator has used this footage, so that's still pretty cool in my eyes.
One more thing I want to add, someone just found a drive-by footage of the cleanup from the outside, which means we now have more footage of it from the outside, which is pretty cool.
For now, that is the end of the Mexia supermarket story. If you have any leads about the footage, please let me know, and thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it or didn't enjoy it, let me know in the comments below. Peace.